This video is a complete chronological timeline of the Team Fortress series. How the games and comics interact with each other, and with it, will contain spoilers for every piece of media in the series as of 2024. Way back in around 4000 BCE, around the time the ancient Sumerian civilization began to rise, there was a wizard called Merasmus. He was not the most powerful, but he got by. Merasmus claimed to have been born before time, was the scream on the lips of children, and the curse born on the breath of the dead. Merasmus said a lot of things, but whether they were true is questionable. Yet what is true is that he worshipped Bonzo, the evil circus god of Sumeria. Keep this in mind for later. As we jump ahead around 6,000 years to the 18th century, the world had changed a lot. The ancient Sumerian civilization had risen and fallen, as many others had too. This century was one of rapid innovation. Shakespeare recalls was the strongest writer who had ever lived. He had a powerful grasp of language and mind. He invented the two-story building, the stage play, America, and the rocket launcher. Without a way to get to the second story of these new buildings, rocket jumping became common practice. It was crippling, but it worked. This was the creation of America and rocket launchers. In 1788, less than a year after the first settlers colonized Australia, a boat arrived with new settlers. One of them was Nicholas Crowder. However, upon his view of the heat and privations of this island, he said, "Screw this," commandeered the boat, and set course on a one-man voyage to the South Pole. Upon his arrival in the Antarctic region, he changed and found purpose. Since then, every December 18th, Old Nick travelled to Australia to find out if the children had been naughty or nice. The naughty ones were abducted and forced to work in factories to make toys for him to sell. The good ones were given the greatest gift: no abduction. Over in England, each generation of the Mann family had upheld a tradition of success, wealth, and death. Ezekiel Mann was a very successful shipping magnate. He was the youngest of 5 children, yet by the time he bought his first fleet, his siblings were dead. His son Ebenezer became an only child after his sisters were claimed by a fire. By 17, he was a millionaire and went on to be a successful railroad tycoon. The Mann family believed that only one in each generation could be successful, and they had to fight for that right. However, Ebenezer had only one son, Zephaniah, and just like his ancestors, he wanted to be successful. Over in another part of the world, a little girl discovered the bodies of her parents. She was devastated, and although young, believed the Mann family to be responsible for it in some way. She swore revenge and knew she would get it someday. It would just take time. In the early 19th century, over in the Cambridgeshire estate, Mann-upon-Thames in England, Zephaniah Neodamus Mann began a company, Zephaniah Mann and Sons Co. As hats showed status and power during this period, his company advertised itself as a compendium of hats and also broadswords, musket guns, and doomsday weapons for immediate sale. As a ruthless businessman, by 1814, he offered employment to children at the age of 6 to smelt iron, break in horses, light fuses, dispose of poison, and fix cogwheel blockages with small bands. As the company grew, Zephaniah required help. He hired a tracker and aide, Barnabas Hale of the Australias, and together they expanded the company. Zephaniah also met Bet Darling and married her. Even though he had married Bet, Zephaniah did not care too much for her. He wanted an heir, and his business consumed most of his time. In Mann Manor on September 2nd, 1822, during the Great Eagle Scourge, Bet Mann screamed in pain as she went into labor. Her midwife, Patience Merriweather, offered physical, emotional, and medical support. In the next room, however, Zephaniah grew frustrated with the noise. He and Barnabas had heard of a new war that had broken out, and they hoped to supply munitions to both sides. It was only when the noise stopped that Patience interrupted the meeting. She told him that his wife had passed away during the birth. Unlike Barnabas, who broke into tears, Zephaniah appeared not to care. Instead, he asked only about the child, in which Patience explained that there was not just one child, but 3. Zephaniah Mann was not a fan of his wife, but she had finally done something right. Bet Mann had given him 3 boys. Within the nursery, he was guided by the midwife towards a cradle with 2 of them inside, in which he called one Blutarch and the other Redmond. They were strapping, alert and handsome, but he noticed the 3rd was missing. Patience knew what kind of man Zephaniah was and warned him that this child, Gray, was different. He was much smaller than the other 2 and could also talk. Little Gray Man was incredibly intelligent. As he had grown in his mother's womb, he had listened to her and taught himself English. To pass the time until his birth, he had even invented a new form of algebra. Zephaniah was fearful and disgusted by Gray as the child uttered the words, "Hello, Father," and ordered that he be smothered. Yet on this day, fate intervened. An eagle smashed through the window of the nursery, grabbed the child and flew away. In his rage, Zephaniah vowed to smother the demon bird and the little Gray Man. The death of Bet Mann was seen as an inconvenience to Zephaniah. Before he could hire someone to take on the role to raise his sons, a woman came to Mann Manor and offered her services as a governess. Unknown to Zephaniah, his family had taken away her parents, and she wanted to take away his children, to smother them in their sleep and watch him in pain. But when the patriarch explained the Mann generational line of how only one sibling could survive, a champion molded into greatness after they had killed their brothers and sisters, the governess had another idea. These were not seen as children by their father. They were simply pawns in the next generation of honor and wealth. He would not feel anything if they died. Mann wanted only one of his sons to live and thrive, the strongest to kill the weakest, and he asked that this woman sculpt them for him. She accepted this job, and to those she worked with, assumed the name of Elizabeth. Even now, her real name is unknown, but she also used the names of Emily and Helen at points. As Elizabeth raised Redmond and Blutarch, she pushed them to dislike each other, to bicker as intended by Zephaniah, but she also treated them equally, never to let the other win. As long as she was around, there would be no champion, no man to honor the Mann generational line. Meanwhile, Gray was raised by the eagle who had saved his life. This frail, helpless child was accepted as one of her children, kept warm at night, nestled in her feathery breast, and fed on a diet of grubs and mice. As the years passed and Gray grew strong enough, he ate the mother who had raised him, her children, and crawled his way back to civilization. He knew who he was and what he deserved. All he had to do was study, plot, and wait for his revenge and time to strike. Moving ahead to the 1840s, over in the Badlands of New Mexico of the Americas, a husband and wife were attacked by a bear. Mrs. Huggins was mauled and killed, but her husband managed to hide under her corpse until it went away. Too scared to move or leave, he founded a town in the very spot she had died, a town he called Hugginsville. As more people came to live in the town, Mayor Claude Huggins was one day bullied by a pack of teenagers and they forced him to change the name to Teufort. By 1847, the name Teufort was officially adopted by the town. Over in Mann Manor, England, Zephaniah attempted to include his sons in the family business as they grew older. Redmond and Blutarch loved their father, but they hated each other. They had been raised in wealth and had not had to work a day in their lives. It was when they suggested something together to their father that he listened to them. Zephaniah Mann and Sons was successful in England, and they suggested he expand their weapons concern to the uncolonized westernmost regions of America. They told him many tales of a land of gravel as far as the eye could see, a resource he viewed as valuable to the construction and creation of weapons. Before he committed to this, he also explored other continents. One of note was to the Terra Australias with Barnabas. It was here that they found something interesting. An undiscovered element that looked like gold but was so much more. An element Zephaniah called miracle gravel. Zephaniah and Barnabas had no idea what they had found, but they mined as much of it as they could and returned to England. Unknown to them, this element, if used correctly, increased intelligence, virility, muscle mass, and hyper-extended the human lifespan. It also added a love of fighting, heavy drinking, and the growth of facial hair. Also unknown to Zephaniah, his son, Gray, watched and followed his family from afar, and as a much smarter man, he procured and discovered the true power of the element. What he had was not enough, and he wanted the cash his father had hidden away. To get it, he established contact with his father and attempted to blackmail him in around 1849, but Zephaniah simply ignored his weakling son. 1850 was an incredibly important year for the Mann family and their trajectory. Over in England, with this vision given to him by Blutarch and Redmond, Zephaniah dreamed of transforming the described virgin lands and its vast halls into the most majestic and profitable pits of gravel. So, he spent the entirety of his sizable fortune on the purchase of a continent-sized piece of land in the unclaimed frontier of the Americas. On his way over on the boat to the New World with his sons, Barnabas and Elizabeth, Zephaniah contracted white plague, marasmus, sweating, sickness, tumors of the eyelids, pleurisy, membranous cramp, and scarlet rash. During the drive west, he contracted brain itch, stomatitis, and blood poisoning. After selling his Cambridgeshire estate, he contracted falling sickness, walking sickness, stationary sickness, shingles, jaundice spine, and skull bloat. After the group eventually arrived in the Badlands of New Mexico, all Zephaniah found was fool's gravel in a windswept desert hell. His sons had made a huge mistake. There was no gravel, only coal and sand, and he would never forgive them for it. In a bitter rage, the family settled in Teufort within the local saloon. As they adjusted to a new life in the untamed frontier, Zephaniah contracted putrid fever, blackwater fever, green fever, spotted fever, and after a complication from a serious bout of superfluous uterus, he even contracted uterus fever. Zephaniah Mann had always been strong-willed and hard-working, but this collection of illnesses broke him down. In his anguish, Barnabas procured poppy flowers to produce medicines to ease his pain, and Elizabeth stayed by his side. As he contracted impetigo, his skin began to slough off. Elizabeth could see just how dire Zephaniah's situation was. Not only was he close to death, but his sons at the age of 28 were no closer to his goal. Neither had killed the other. This was exactly what Elizabeth had wanted. Any attempts by them to harm the other had been stopped by her. The governess could see how desperate he was and proposed a solution. When he died, which was surely to be soon, he should leave his sons the land he had purchased to share equally. In doing so, their natural man instinct should kick in and push them into war to claim the land for themselves. She suggested that she should act as a sort of administrator and help the brothers set up companies with warriors to fight. Redmond versus Blutarch, a war to find Zephaniah's champion. He liked this idea and, under Elizabeth's guidance, decided to write a will. As there was no paper in this godforsaken frontier, he used his skin, but his pain was not over. As he wrote, he contracted Skyrion's palsy as his hand cramped. Zephaniah Mann did not want to die. He challenged God and his angels to come for him, for he would only come kicking and screaming to heaven. Upon the completion of his will, in his final moments, Elizabeth read through the document and was happy with what she saw. With only minutes left, the governess finally revealed her true plan of how when his sons inherited this land, she would ensure they would fight forever, a permanent stalemate. There would be no heir, no champion, no victory. No man in this generation would be successful. Red and Blue would fight forever in a pointless war for gravel. And why? Well, the loss of her parents, of course. As Zephaniah Mann finally died, Elizabeth left his room with the will. The death of Zephaniah Mann was an incredibly significant moment, and as he had planned, his will was read out to his nearest and dearest. Of sound mind during the writing of his will, he vowed to haunt the earth as a horrifying poltergeist, with such time as he had quenched his all-consuming thirst for vengeance against the world, and especially against his dunderhead sons for what their actions had put him through. To his faithful aide and tracker, Barnabas Hale of the Australias, he left complete control of Mann & Sons' munitions concern, the Mann family business. To Elizabeth, he left the rest, the residue of his estate, including old deeds, accounts debt public and private, his tobacco plantation, and what remained of the fortune his adult-pated sons had squandered. He asked that she find the gravel he was unable to find, and in his honour, place it into a pit. In a secret part of his will, he also left the entirety of his miracle gravel cache that he had uncovered with Barnabas during their trip to the Australias. He also warned her that Gray had attempted to blackmail him, and it was up to her to keep the miracle gravel safe and Gray secret. And finally, to his 28-year-old sons, Blutarch and Redmond, he left them the greatest curse of all, partnership. The land he had purchased in the New World was theirs to share, split evenly between them, something he knew they would hate and squabble over. After reading the will, Barnabas focused his attention on his company. Elizabeth stored away the useless miracle gravel and used her inherited gold to establish TF Industries. Meanwhile, Gray, with his funding from his own company, Gray Gravel, investigated the properties of miracle gravel further. Over in Australia, the population discovered the gold-like substance, and as they believed they were the first to find it, they called it Australium. Almost instantly, this dim-witted country became a collection of the most intelligent minds as they outpaced the rest of the world through increased intelligence, virility, muscle mass, a love of fighting, heavy drinking, and magnificent facial hair. They explored teleportation, cloaking, and the entire spectrum of the mustache sciences. Under the guise of TF Industries, Elizabeth the Administrator offered Blutarch funding and help to fight his brother. Of course, he did not know that this was Elizabeth, under the guise of this parent company. Blutarch founded Builders League United. To the public, this company specialized in construction operations, the discovery of gravel and mining it. Yet, under the many subfronts across the Badlands lay secret bases of operations designed to spy on local governments, store weapons, plan and plot against his brother. All of this information was then reported back to TF Industries for the administrator to use to expand the company's reach, to blackmail government officials, manipulate world activities, and global powers. As the Badlands had grown a reputation over these years as a place for hired killers, hat fetishes, and scrabby hellfolk, Blutarch decided to hire the world's deadliest mercenaries to take the land by force through his company. His mercenaries consisted of Abraham Lincoln as a pyro, Nikolai Tesla as an engineer, Davy Crockett as a sniper, Billy the Kid as a scout, Fu Manchu as a spy, John Henry as a heavy, Alfred Noble as a demoman, Stonewall Jackson as a soldier, and Sigmund Freud as a medic. This could have gone very well for Blutarch, but his brother also formed his own company. Once again as a subsidiary of TF Industries, Redmond established Reliable Excavation Demolition. To the public, it specialized in demolition operations, the discovery of gravel and mining it, and just like Builders League United, it had many secret bases under subfronts across the Badlands. From these, he hired his own mercenaries. As each team fought, the Gravel War began. Unknown to the Mann brothers, TF Industries monitored both teams of mercenaries and kept their battles balanced. There would be no champion, no victor, only a stalemate. As 1851 arrived, it was clear that both teams were evenly matched, red and blue, and the war would simply continue for the years to come. Over this year since Zephaniah's death, Elizabeth at first found peace. She had settled a debt, but as the months passed, she began to feel numb. Nothing mattered anymore. Her life's goal, her vengeance was complete. Was this all there was? One evening, alone, she gave in to the idea of a darker desire. Zephaniah was dead, and TF Industries was fully capable of running without her to ensure the Gravel War continued its stalemate. So she took the leap. Fate, however, once again intervened. Grey Man had been ignored by his father, but after his death, the miracle gravel he sought had been left to someone else he believed he could manipulate. Although Elizabeth was dead by the time he cut her down, with the infusion of what the Australians called Australium into her veins, she came back. Grey knew a lot about this woman, her feud with his father, her many identities and original plan for his brothers, but he did not care. He only wanted the Australium Zephaniah had left her in his will. Elizabeth at first did not care about the Fool's Gold, but when Grey explained how it could hyperextend the human lifespan and bring someone back from the dead, she suddenly found her purpose again. To remove Grey from the premises, Elizabeth promised to give him all of the Australium she had in 1 week, but as soon as he left, she took her large quantity of the element and the body of Zephaniah Mann with her to a cave basement in TF Industries in the Organ Needle. Just as Grey had done to her, she infused the corpse with the element and Zephaniah came back. As he regained consciousness and looked around, he saw screens that displayed the Gravel War. He was unable to move and unable to close his eyes. This was exactly what the administrator needed. Not only would he be forced to live forever, but as long as he did live, he would see the stalemate of the Gravel War continue, and with the power of Australium, she used it to keep herself young so that she could be there with him until the end. In 1857, outside of his contributions to the Gravel War, President Abraham Lincoln searched for a better answer to access the second story of a building instead of rocket jumping. Stairs, he called them, a collection of steps that allowed access to new floors. This first set was constructed in his laboratory at Ford's Theatre, but was not shown completely to the rest of the world. It is claimed by some that Lincoln actually died during a rocket jump, even though he had invented stairs, and as a result, mankind agreed never to invent anything again as our scientists and scholars turned to the most noble endeavor, astrology. Based on events to come, however, Lincoln did survive this rocket jump, and this story is false. As 1861 arrived, both Redmond and Blutarch sold a coal mine on their land to Barnabas Hale for just 1 nickel. It was during this period that Barnabas also brought in his son, Bilius, to train him to run the business. The opening of a coal mine in the Badlands brought with it new jobs, and Barnabas claimed a reasonable number of casualties. Still, in the background, the mercenaries fought, evenly matched, and became despised by the population of the Badlands, and yet they continued to advertise for replacement fighters in this war. Merasmus the Wizard also attempted to earn a living through the brewing of hat tonics from his castle on the moors of Scotland through the Scottish drug company that delivered worldwide. The world was fascinated by how much Australia had changed over the past decade and had heard rumours of some sort of gold they had found. In 1862, the nation claimed there was no gold at all. Australium was natural only to Australia, and in an attempt to hide it and its existence, they camouflaged their mines. One of them was located in the heart of their country, within the Uluru-Katachuta National Park. To conceal the Australian reserve, a hollow shell of balsa wood and styrofoam was constructed. Although he had invented stairs and had been an incredible ally in the Gravel War, on April 15, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Tower of Hats Booth. Shortly after this, Booth found himself in a shootout between himself and a large group of people. In a moment of bravery, young Bilius Hale charged at Booth and held him down as people took turns shooting at him. For his service, Bilius was awarded John's Hat Tower. As 1890 arrived, the Gravel War had raged on for 40 whole years without resolution. At the age of 68, Blutarch and Redmond sought out other ways to beat each other. It was during this period that Blutarch heard word of a local inventor in town, Radigan Conager. This man was one of the smartest people in the Badlands, and in his store, Conager's Tool and Munitions, he designed advanced technologies and weapons. Conager also had a fascination with the late Abraham Lincoln, and in his spare time, had designed several devices that could have saved him if he knew what was coming. In a meeting, Blutarch explained his predicament to Radigan, of how he had inherited land from his father to share, and how he had hired mercenaries to claim it for himself, but his brother had done the same. If he could not take Redmond's share of the land, then he hoped to simply outlive him instead. From his companies through Builders League United, Blutarch had become a very wealthy man, and he was willing to pay anything to make this possible. He was not getting any younger and asked the inventor to build a machine that would allow him to outlive Redmond, to defy God's plan and make him a monster. With the prospect of a new challenge, Radigan Conager agreed. Upon the return to his store, Radigan was greeted by an intruder. She claimed it would save them both time if they did not discuss who she was or how she knew what she knew, and the inventor accepted this right away. Elizabeth had an offer for Radigan. She knew about his deal with Blutarch and asked that he not build this life extension machine. As predicted, he refused, so Elizabeth proposed something else. The former maidservant explained the rise of the Australians after their discovery of Australium, of how they had outpaced the rest of the world, and how every one of mankind's innovations came from the lager pickled brain of an Australian. If the element she held in her hand, Australium, could make a genius out of an Australian, what could it do for a man of his intelligence? Luckily for the inventor, Elizabeth had spent the last decade hunting down every ounce of it, in return for £100 of this transformative new element. She asked that if he must build Blutarch Mann his immortality machine, then he should build one for Redmond too. This was a fantastic offer, and Radigan accepted the terms. Over the following years, he designed the machine and began the construction of Mark I of the immortality device. In essence, it zapped the user upon death and brought them back from the dead. On July 17, 1894, Radigan completed Blutarch's device, and a couple of weeks later, on August 3rd, he constructed Redmond's. There was, however, a third secret device constructed on April 14th of an unknown year. It has not been confirmed who this device was made for. A working relationship did begin between Elizabeth and Radigan at this point, and it is very likely she was given an upgraded Mark II of the immortality device. Outside of this, with his own stash of Australium and an incredible mind, Gray also developed his own immortality device. In opposition to his brothers, Gray attached his device directly to his spine and powered it with Australium. Over in Australia, on January 25th, 1895, the population believed they had discovered mysterious new geological lumps. Australian scientists called these hills. A couple of months later, the King of Australia waged war against them and entered the battle himself. He later became the King of the Hill after the mound surrendered without a fight. Through his close working relationship with Elizabeth and the invention of new devices and weaponry thanks to his interaction with Australium, Radigan Conager went through a dramatic mental and physical transformation. His inventions became bolder, and he grew much taller, a moustache, muscles, and a thirst for beer. As the Badlands entered the 20th century, Bilious Hale worked with his home nation, Australia, through Manco to co-invent the first robot. As an Australian, he assured it would only be used for violence. His father, Barnabas, had left the company to him, and he ran it as a Hale. Bilious also grew a connection to someone labelled only as her. It is likely that she was Elizabeth. In 1907, Manco was voted the safest place to work in the Badlands after Bilious claimed no mercenary warfare was allowed on the premises, but when a reporter was sent to interview the mercenaries of Red and Blue for comment, they were killed in the crossfire. 1910 marked a pretty significant year for Manco. They won a bid to become the sole munitions supplier for both Reliable Excavation Demolitions and Builders League United through TF Industries. These weapons were cheaply made and broke easily, but as long as the war continued, TF Industries would continue to purchase them for each team and make a lot of money. Although Manco had begun as a standalone business, it became a division of TF Industries and supplied weapons to all subsidiaries. Within the vaults of these subsidiaries, more and more Australium was hidden away as Elizabeth hunted it down, to keep Zephaniah alive, to watch his sons fail together from the isolated, locked away cave basement of the TF Industries building. It was also around this time that Radigan Conager passed away, and as soon as he was buried, Blutarch plundered his grave and stole the blueprints and schematics buried with him in an attempt to understand how the inventor had created the immortality device. but even the brightest on Blutarch's team could not figure it out. A couple of years later, Franklin D. Roosevelt found himself in hospital after he lost both of his legs in a rocket jumping accident. He later stumbled upon Lincoln's notes and perfected the modern staircase. This freed the people from the tyranny of the second floor of buildings. After 50 profitable years, in 1922, Bilious Hale decided to shut down his coal mine and turned it into a historical museum. The interest in coal had fallen for weaponry, and he sought out the next boom to earn revenue for his company. He believed a hat factory would be the next industry boom. 1930 was an interesting period in the Gravel War. By this time, the Mann brothers were 108 years old. Their petty squabble had continued, and although they were still alive, their mercenaries had either died or were too old to continue in the fight. The brothers once again called out for mercenaries to fight, and TF Industries made sure they got what they needed. This shadowy organization had many teams, each person hand-selected by the company's CEO and administrator. Team Echelon, Team Citadel, and Team Vanguard were just 3. For Blutarch and Redmond, however, they formed a new one, Team Fortress, led by their heavy weapons guy. This team worked pretty well together. Greg the Scout grew a pretty close relationship with Ross the Soldier. Beatrice the Pyro helped defend Virgil the Sniper against spy attacks. Greg the Demoman was a nuisance to everyone, and Fred the Engineer aided and protected his team with his teleporters, ammunition dispensers, and turrets. The spy, whose name is unknown, made the life of every engineer a misery, and the medic, whose name is also unknown, healed his team and poisoned his enemies. From a photo found in the TF Industries archives, if the man here is Fred the Engineer, which is highly likely, then he also raised a son during this time, Del Conager. This would also have made Fred the son of Radagon the Inventor. This has not been confirmed canonically, but it is likely. In his role of area denial, defense, and support, Fred was happy to help out the Sniper. He and Virgil had been friends since before the war, and the Sniper trusted the Engineer with almost anything. Virgil hated the spies that came for him as he lined up shots, and Fred offered a solution. He plucked out the Sniper's eyes and replaced them with robotic ones. These allowed him to see through everything and detect spies with ease. The only issue was that he struggled to sleep as he also saw through his eyelids. Thousands of miles away in 1932, the great nation of New Zealand was a land of artists and intellectuals. One of their brightest scientists, Bill Bell, predicted and warned them of a disaster on the way, and to survive it, they had to build a dome around the whole country and sink it into the ocean. The nation listened to him, and they did this. A utopia and paradise under the sea. Over on the moors of Scotland in the UK, one Halloween night, a 7-year-old Tavish Finnegan de Groot went out to earn some money. He and his mother had been left to fend for themselves after his father had passed away. Mr. de Groot had been a demoman, and he was one of the best. He had once walked 15 miles in the rain to blow up the Queen of England for just 1 nickel. On this All Hallows Eve, as the ghosts rose, Mrs. de Groot hoped that one of them would have a job for her son. As he explored the moors, he did not find one ghost, but he did find a castle with "Help Wanted" inscribed on a nearby tombstone. This, however, was no ordinary castle. It was the great wizard Merasmus' eldritch castle of dark magic. He wanted the cleaner, and those who had come before had died on the job. Despite the boy's age, Merasmus allowed him inside and told him the deal: a cleanly swept library in return for a shiny nickel. This place was full of ancient artifacts and books. as Merasmus had lost some of his previous cleaners to the dangers of his library. He warned the boy to gaze not upon the tome and ignore all temptations. Over the following hours, as Tavish swept this foul place, he heard the faint whispers from an ancient tome that sat perfectly on a pedestal. "Read me," it said. The Bombonomicon contained the arcane secrets and knowledge of bombs. It asked the boy to come closer, to lean in and take a peek of what it contained. As the son of a demoman, Tavish gave in to this temptation and leaned in just close enough. In this moment, the Bombonomicon zapped his eye and began to haunt it. This was the greatest day of the tome's life, but it was one of the worst for Tavish. Merasmus had told the child to ignore the book, but he had ignored his warnings. More annoyed about how smug the Bombonomicon would become, Merasmus cast a spell, Basbo Badaba. In an instant, the wizard, his eldritch castle of dark magic, and the book disappeared. As for Tavish, when he finally woke up, he found himself alone in a field, and his eye was gone. For each passing Halloween night that came, people spoke of a possessed eye that stalked the moors with a wicked magician. Over in Stuttgart, Germany in 1939, as World War II began, a young man by the name of Mr. Ludwig was curious about the capabilities of the human body. He trained in medicine but held no regard for the Hippocratic Oath. He did heal his patients, but only to continue his experiments on them. At one point, he managed to acquire a medical license, and although a doctor in a Nazi-occupied Germany, he did not participate in the barbaric acts performed. He instead satisfied his own morbid fascinations. Meanwhile, in the Midwest United States, a young soldier wanted to play his role, but upon his attempts, he was rejected by every branch of the US military. In response to this, the Patriot took on the name of Sergeant Jane Doe and bought a ticket to Europe to fight on his own. Upon his arrival in Poland, he killed every Nazi he saw and entered prisoner of war camps voluntarily. He was a man of strong will and broke every last one of his captors mentally until they asked him to leave. In September of 1941, during the early stages of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Soviet authorities labeled the patriarch of a Russian family as a counter-revolutionary and had him executed. Shortly after his father's death, Mikhail, his mother, and younger sisters, Yana, Bronislava, and Zana, were deported to a northern Siberian gulag. Just 3 months later, in December, this forced labor camp burned to the ground, and the guards who had tortured and brutalized the prisoners met a similar fate. As it burned, Mikhail ran with his mother's hand in his, Zana in his arms, and his sisters by his side. These 3 months had changed his view on the world, and he became extremely protective of his family, and sought to destroy the evil men of the world. Following this, the family went into hiding and constructed a cabin in the Jugjur Mountains of northeastern Siberia. 1 year later, in 1942, 10 years after New Zealand had voluntarily sunk to the bottom of the ocean, the population was confused. Bilbel had warned them of a disaster, but from what they could tell, nothing had happened on the surface. They hated living at the bottom of the ocean. They had also wasted all of their resources getting here. Bilbel refused to take any criticism from his peers, and instead came to them with another warning. Magma would fill their dome, and the only way to avoid it was to blast their nation into space. The leaders were angry. They did not trust his predictions and mocked him. When Bilbel returned home to his wife Lana and baby Mundi, he complained about how he had been treated. He truly believed he was correct. During this time, the scientist had also built a rocket he planned to use in case they did not trust his prophecy. A rocket with only one seat. Bilbel explained to his wife that he only had time to build just one rocket, a way to secure his future. Before he left for space, he asked to embrace his son just one last time. Lana was correctly angry, and as the husband and wife broke into a fight, little baby Mundy climbed into the rocket and blasted away. As the rocket smashed through the dome of New Zealand, water poured in and the nation flooded. Almost everyone inside drowned except for two people, Bilbel and Lana, who hid away within the scientist's lab. As for the child, the rocket did not reach the stars. Instead, it landed just a mile away onto a farm. The owners of the farm did not know where this child had come from, but they decided to raise little Mundy as their own, as an Australian. To the rest of the world, the fall of New Zealand was viewed as a freak accident. In around 1944, a French spy found himself in Boston, Massachusetts. It was here he met a woman and she fell pregnant with his child. The spy did abandon this woman, but he kept an eye on her and their son, Jeremy, from afar. As World War II came to an end in 1945, the planet began to recover. Over these years, the spy returned to visit the mother of his child, but he disguised himself as the Welsh singer Tom Jones. Because of this, the child began a fascination with the legend. Even though the war had come to an end, Dr. Ludwig continued on with his experiments and pushed himself to see what his surgical skills were capable of. He had no compassion for the sick or any respect for human dignity, but he did for doves. One especially was Archimedes. In one of his procedures, as he sought to learn more, the doctor removed the whole skeleton of his patient as they slept. As a consequence, his medical license was taken away from him. On another occasion, somehow, he also managed to meet the devil. Whether he passed away or performed a ritual is unknown, but in this interesting moment, the former doctor signed a contract, his soul in return for something. This could have been medical knowledge or even a chance to have more years on Earth. Ludwig was very smart, and he sought out a way to evade his end of the deal. Article 9, Section 7 stated that the contract only held up if Hell owned the majority stake of Ludwig's soul. This was a loophole he hoped to exploit somehow. In Texas, when he was old enough, Dale Conager put his efforts into education and began to earn himself science PhDs that only amplified his ability to design, build and repair a variety of machines. As the 40s came to a close in 1949, Sergeant Jane Doe was informed that the war had ended 4 years before. He was unaware and had continued his murderous rampage. He felt that he had played his part and served his nation well. So he created his own medals and wore them with pride. As the 1950s arrived, Bilious Hale continued to run Manco and supply the Mann brothers with weaponry for their petty war. His son, Saxton, also became a student of a hunter called Charles Darling. This man shared the maiden name of Bet, the mother of Redmond and Blutarch, before she had married into the Mann family. Whether there was some distant relation there is unknown. It is, however, interesting. Saxton Hale was a typical Australian. He liked to drink, fight, and he had a magnificent mustache. His father hoped he would take over Manco one day, just like he had from his father, but Saxton had no interest in these younger years. The Gravel War had been stuck in a stalemate for 100 years, and at 128 years old, Blutarch Mann began to worry he would lose to his brother. The immortality device the late Radigan Conager had created for him 60 years before had begun to malfunction. Over the years of use, Blutarch had periodically died, and when this happened, the machine zapped him and brought him back. What he had noticed lately was that each time he died, it took longer and longer for him to return. He had seen the other side and there was nothing there, even though he had looted Radigan's corpse upon the inventor's death. Blutarch and his team could not understand the blueprints or schematics they had found to fix the device. Then he had an idea. Radigan's grandson, Del, had earned 11 hard science PhDs. He was also an inventor. If Del Conager was as smart as his grandfather, maybe he could help. Within Blutarch Mann's office, he explained to the engineer of his predicament, his war with his brother, the device Radigan had constructed, and the issues he had with it. Del was flattered that someone would look at him and think he was capable of fixing such a machine, but going in blind would surely lead to Blutarch's permanent death. Mann disclosed that he had actually looted his grandfather's grave and acquired the blueprints, and these could help him. To Del, Blutarch's actions were obviously an invasion of any respect toward his grandfather, but on the other hand, to work on something so interesting was difficult to turn down. Blutarch also requested that if Del found anything of interest outside of this job, as he deciphered his grandfather's notes, he should give them straight to him. Back at his workshop, Del opened his grandfather's notes, blueprints and schematics, and inside, he did find something interesting. A map of Australian caches, and that Radigan had created 3 machines. Just like Radigan, Del used this information to fix Blutarch's machine, and as Redmond also continued to live on without major issues, it is likely he was also persuaded to fix the other brothers too. Over in Australia, Charles Darling felt that Saxton's attention was elsewhere, on a girl. It was during this period that Hale spent a lot of his time with Maggie. It has not been confirmed if this was her or if there was someone else in his life. Regardless, Charles moved his attention to capturing animals and storing them in cages. With this idea, he formed Darling Zoos, an enterprise in which people could come and look at how sad the caged animals were. Saxton preferred to fight the animals in the wild, and by 1957, the former mentor and student became nemesis. On one occasion, as Saxton and Maggie fought a panther in the African veldt, Darling interrupted them and stole the beast for his zoo. This angered the duo, but they promised to always be with each other to fight animals. Saxton also swore he could never see himself behind a corporate desk and would always be there to punch panthers with Maggie. Meanwhile, in another part of Australia, the child who had crashed onto the farm found his calling as a mercenary. He was proficient with a sniper and went by the name Mr. Mundy. He was not aware of his origin and truly believed himself to be an Australian. His father did not understand why he wanted to be a crazed gunman, but the sniper explained he was actually an assassin. He had standards, was polite, and efficient. Even though he had promised to always be there to punch panthers in the face with Maggie, as the 1960s began, and his father became too old to run the company, Saxton Hale became the CEO of Manco. To help him, he hired 2 assistants, Mr. Bidwell and Mr. Reddy. Together, they dealt with regular assistants' activities. They prepared Saxton's breakfast, kept track of his list of nemesis, and dealt with customers. Without her partner in crime, Maggie looked for an alternate. She married a man called Roger, but he was nothing like Saxton. He died shortly after in 1962. Eventually, Maggie lost her spark for fighting animals, and as Saxton fell into his work at Manco, their connection faded. Eventually, she accepted a job at Darling Zoos, and as she and Saxton barely spoke, it was not difficult to keep this secret to herself that she worked with his nemesis, Charles Darling. Meanwhile, as Saxton worked with TF Industries to supply weapons for Red and Blue, he formed an interesting relationship with the administrator. She had done her best to keep any information about herself secret, but to a very select few. When she was not called the administrator, she went by the name Helen. A slight rebrand from the other names she had used, Elizabeth and Emily being just two. Helen secretly had an upgraded Australian-powered immortality device grafted onto her forearm. She had also collected the world's largest supply of Australium over the past 100 years and hidden it away within the vaults of Manco. The administrator had played the Mann brothers against each other for years, established thousands of shell companies, filled entire coal mines with the bodies of her enemies, and gathered dangerous information about world leaders so that she could control them. Even still, Grey Mann and Charles Darling, who, just like her, were very powerful and wealthy, had eyes and ears everywhere, and were aware of her secrets and caches of the youth-expanding elements. They just could not access them. Saxton was aware that Helen had used his company to hide away Australium, but he did not completely understand what it was. Helen also used her charm to manipulate him through steak dinners and sex. He would do almost anything she asked, yet his interaction with TF Industries was not normally directly through Helen. It was through her assistant, Miss Pauling, a young woman who at first appeared to be timid, but would do anything to get a job done. Pauling purchased weapons for the mercenaries, dealt with the administrator's enemies, kept the mercenaries out of trouble, destroyed evidence and confidential information. On a regular week, she was given a phone book of targets to eliminate. If she did not complete her task, she was told she would be taken out. Even still, she trusted her boss and admired her. Later in around 1966, Grey welcomed his daughter into the world, Olivia, the first man born into the bloodline in over a century. His Australian-powered immortality device had allowed Grey to work hard, stay active, make a child, retain his age, and most importantly, not die. The opposite of his brother's devices that brought them back from the dead upon their frequent deaths as they grew older and older. At Grey Gravel Co., Grey had waited long enough for his brothers to pass away. He wanted the family business his father had given away to the Hale family. He wanted the Australium hidden away in the vaults by the administrator, and he also wanted the land his brothers had. To fast-track this, he began to plan robots that could kill the mercenaries his brothers hired, but these would take a while to complete. In early 1968, Blutarch Mann looked at his mercenaries in the Gravel War and judged just how capable Team Fortress were. They had fought for 38 years and they had aged. Fred the engineer had to rely on robotic legs to walk. The medic had disappeared. Virgil the sniper had become more sadistic in his warfare, and the others also had their issues. To rectify this, they were rebranded to Team Fortress Classic, let go by TF Industries, and the administrator handpicked 9 new mercenaries as the new Team Fortress. Helen held all of the power in this war, wanted it to continue, and was not willing to give it up. If Zephaniah was forced to see everything after all of these years, she was going to give him a show. She performed extensive background searches on these hires to make sure she could keep them in line if needed, preferably those with dark secrets to exploit and low IQs to manipulate. These were hired in the summer of 1968. For their heavy, Mikhail was offered the role. This was an incredible opportunity for him and his family. TF Industries offered him a lot of money he could send to his family who hid in the Jugja Mountains of northeastern Siberia from the Soviet Union. It also gave him the outlet to kill. As he arrived in the Badlands, he kept his true identity and backstory to himself. He also played down his intelligence in an effort to outsmart those who thought they were better than him. Supplied by Manco, he stormed the battlefield with a minigun he called Sasha. She weighed 150 kilograms and fired $200 custom tool cartridges at 10,000 rounds per minute. This cost TF Industries $400,000 for every 12 seconds of use. Yet, the money did not matter to the administrator. From Germany, Mr. Ludwig was hired as the medic. His knowledge of human anatomy was extremely comprehensive. He committed doctor-assisted homicide against his foes as he healed his team with his medigun. This was the field work he had hoped for, and with 8 other people on his team, he had plenty of subjects to use for experimental procedures. Almost instantly, Ludwig and Mikhail became close. From a long line of demo men, Tavish Finnegan de Groot joined the team too. Although he was drunk most of the time, he still performed extremely well. The scout came in the form of Jeremy, a young, energetic man from Boston, handy with a shotgun and a baseball bat. A French spy also took over as the team spy. Unknown to Jeremy, his father would fight side by side with him. Mr. Mundy was hired as the sniper, and Sergeant Jane Doe was hired as the soldier with his rocket launcher. Interestingly enough, when Jane moved to the Badlands, he discovered a castle whose owner sought out a roommate. Merasmus had seemingly relocated to the Badlands after the eye incident, but he needed help to pay the bills. The wizard soon learned just how frustrating the soldier was to live with. He did, however, help Jane get a law degree. Just like his father, Dell became the team's engineer. In his role of area denial, he designed the most advanced and deadly turrets to take down his enemies, dispensers to heal and supply his allies with ammunition, and directed teleporters to allow them fast access to the battleground. Finally, a pyro was hired, but very little is known about them. They viewed the world in a completely different way to the rest of the team. Everything looked like a fantasy. Through the magic of Pyroland, fire from their flamethrower looked like rainbows, their enemies looked like cute babies with wings, and their sharp axe looked like a giant lollipop. From Pyro's perspective, they were giving someone magic, when in reality, their enemies were in pain. Just as Team Fortress Classic and the original Mercenaries had done before them, Team Fortress began their fight in the Gravel War. Although Manco did provide the mercenaries with everything they needed, some of them were not happy about the quality of the products. Saxton Hale had not become the 6th richest man in America by putting money into their production. On one occasion, during a battle at Dust Bowl, Heavy and Soldier's guns broke, and Scout's earpiece melted onto his skull. Yet, there were other products that made a huge difference on the battlefield. Amongst their large line of products, Manco offered Jurate pills. When taken, they tripled the size of the kidneys. Mr. Mundy the Sniper found these incredibly useful, and thanks to the new size of his kidneys, was able to fill countless jars with piss. The advert for this product offered the user the ability to make their enemies lose their will to live, and Jurate delivered. When a jar of Sniper's Jurate was launched at an enemy, as soon as they were drenched in that damp stench, they were filled with regret. They would never be happy again, as this memory would always be with them. Mr. Mundy found Jurate exceptionally useful against spies who were unable to disappear after they had been splashed. After enough time as a team, Mr. Ludwig the medic built up enough trust with at least Mikhail the Heavy. The brute was strong and able to take out countless enemies, but Ludwig wanted to improve and help the team more. To do this, he came up with the idea of a process called Übercharge, a way to turn the person he was healing invincible. The only issue was that when he had tried this previously, the heart of his earlier experiments had been unable to survive the surge in energy and exploded. Heavy, however, was bigger, and the medic hoped he would survive the procedure. As the rest of the team fought, Ludwig performed open heart surgery on the Heavy, during which he attached an Uber battery to Mikhail's heart. Unfortunately, the heart, just like the others, exploded, but Ludwig had another idea. From his research and work into mega baboons, he had managed to get his hands on one of their hearts. This time, when he attached the battery to it, it was able to withstand the power. With the healing energy of his medigun, the medic placed the heart inside of the Heavy and healed him back up. The first successful Übercharge was performed shortly after, and the rest of the mercenaries were then put through this procedure too. Alongside his experiments, Mr. Ludwig also thought about his contract with Hell. Having built up trust with his teammates, he secretly removed their souls and surgically attached them to his. In doing so, he owned the majority stake in his bigger soul, and when he eventually returned to Hell, he would be able to renegotiate their contract. As for his teammates, their souls were trapped, and if they died, they would have nowhere to go. This latest batch of mercenaries were absolutely hated by the residents of the Badlands, and most notably, Teufort. Outside of the war, Jeremy the Scout, the Spy, and Jane the Soldier detonated a bomb inside of what they believed to be a bomb-distributing charity. In reality, it was actually a mall Santa training facility. The Scout and Spy were caught, but the Soldier evaded detection. During their court hearing, Jane came back and used his law degree to represent them as their lawyer. When Jeremy learned the truth from the judge of what he had done, he pointed to Jane and claimed it was his idea. The three of them were then sentenced to community service at the Teufort Mall. Soldier was forced to play Santa, Scout as a welcome elf, and Spy just watched them from the sidelines as he updated Miss Pauling on the phone of what had happened. As expected, this did not go to plan. Jane antagonized the father of a young boy as he shaved his head. Scout flirted with every woman that looked at him. And remember that guy from the 18th century, Old Nick, the spirit of Australian Christmas? Well, he came to abduct the children to work in his factories. Under the orders of Miss Pauling, Scout and Soldier fought against the man, but it was a child who had been given an icicle by Spy who finished the job. As Nick attempted to run away with him, the boy stabbed him in the neck. The child did not feel scared. He had just followed Spy's request. The destruction of the thought-to-be mythical holiday mascot awarded the trio with a full pardon for their previous actions. Meanwhile, Tavish the Demoman approached the medic with a request. He had seen what Ludwig had been able to do and asked if he was able to regrow his eye. This was simple for Mr. Ludwig, and as soon as the procedure was done, Tavish had 2 eyes. The issue, however, came that Halloween when the eye grew wings and left his eye socket. It was still haunted, and together, the mercenaries killed the eye. As the mercenaries continued to fight in the Gravel War, and earned a lot of money doing so, Demoman himself claimed to have made $5 million in just 1 year of service. The administrator had her eye on other things. As the space race intensified, Russia launched the first monkey naut into space, Vladimir Bananas. To fight him, in around 1969, the US prepared to send their own monkey naut, Poopy Joe. When Helen heard that the rocket the US government planned to use to launch the monkey into space was powered by the country's entire national reserve of liquid Australium, she set events in motion to acquire the substance for herself. Through a new subdivision of Manco, Monkey Nautics, the administrator offered to host the launch event on her land in the Badlands for the small fee of $1. During this event, the administrator had Manco replace the Australian fuel supply with gravel water from defective suitcase explosives. As a result of this, the rocket exploded upon launch, and so too did Poopy Joe. This event was then covered up. The disappearance of a national hero, Poopy Joe, was incredibly significant. To find out what had happened, the US Senate began an inquiry. Meanwhile, at a projectile weapons expo, Blue Soldier and Red Demo met without the background noise of the gravel war, and they became friends. They went to Las Vegas together, basketball games, and even the Eye Museum. 6 months after this friendship began, Miss Pauling was notified and brought this information to the administrator. She saw this friendship as a betrayal of her trust. If they spoke to each other about work, they may discover the truth, that the voice who commanded them to fight warned them of spies in their base, and belittled them if the secret intelligence was stolen from their base was voiced by the same person, her, that they may figure out she played them against each other. To deal with this problem, she pitted them against each other and used her connection to Saxon Hale to make this happen. He had many weapons to dispose of before the inquiry, and this was the perfect excuse to give them away. For Tavish, he was offered a weapon from the Research and Development Lab to fight his friend, the Islander. A haunted sword of pattern-welded Damascus steel, harmonically balanced and slow-forged for generations in the bowels of captured English kings. As for Jane, he refused to fight, but as soon as he saw a manipulated video of Tavish calling him a citizen, he changed his mind instantly. This led to a week-long war in which the soldier won. As the Poopy Joe inquiry began, both Saxton Hale and Helen were questioned by the United States Senate. When asked, Hale stated that Poopy Joe was a happy monkey, and after he had landed back on Earth after the successful launch, Manco had awarded the little American hero with an all-expenses-paid holiday to a region that started with Bar. It could have been the Bahamas or Bahrain. What Hale did not know was that the government had discovered the secret crash site of the rocket, and in their examination had uncovered that their Australium was missing. As Saxton Hale was unable to answer their questions, they turned to Helen, and they were very surprised and shocked at just how honest she was. In a heavily redacted statement, the administrator explained that she had been stockpiling Australian for years in order to prevent something, that she had used 18 perfect idiots to help her, but even now, what she required the Australian for is unknown. When the Senate heard her reasoning, it shocked them so much that they put an end to this inquiry, let her go, and ordered for the incineration of all documentation of her part in the hearing. The death of Poopy Joe was felt across America, and with the opportunity to make money, Manco crafted and sold commemorative merchandise to remember the little guy. At Grey Gravel Co., Grey raised his daughter and kept an eye on Helen, Saxton and his brother's activities as he worked on his robotic counterparts of the Team Fortress mercenaries. They called him the Maker, and he loved it. In another effort to find out what the mercenaries she paid to blow up each other every day actually knew about her, TF Industries and the war they fought in, Helen hired a director to interview them. She ordered Miss Pauling to make sure this ran as smoothly as possible. For Jeremy, any chance to see Miss Pauling was perfect. He was in love with her, but anything he did to impress her was ignored. Still, it did not stop him from trying. The director himself was the perfect dupe. He was too arrogant to actually listen to what the mercenaries told him. All he had to do was ask them questions based on the limited information the administrator allowed him. The mercenaries were told the interviews were the perfect opportunity to show the people of the Badlands they were not psychopaths. The Heavy refused to answer any question about the death of his father or his family in Serbia. Jeremy believed he was the mentor of the team. Jane talked in detail about his collection of heads he had compiled from his victims. The information gathered from the interviews from all of the mercenaries gave the administrator just what she needed. They had no idea what they were actually a part of, but she still wanted to send a warning just in case any of them thought about discussing the terms of their contract. 1 week later, Heavy received a photo of Sasha in her bed. Soldier was sent a head stolen from his collection. Mr. Mundy was sent photos of his mother and father. This was a threat, and it was a successful one. As for the director himself, Helen had Miss Pauline murder him so that anything he knew died with him. On Halloween of 1970, the mercenaries hosted a party. They had worked hard all year and wanted to relax. Jeremy showed a child the molar of a guy he had hit with his bat. Spy reluctantly gave children cigarettes and a knife, and Heavy made one dressed as Saxton Hale cry after he called him fat. In the corner, Tavish told the terrifying tale of how he had lost his eye when he was a child to the wicked magician Merasmus, of how every Halloween at midnight, some say they had spotted his eye with the wizard stalking the moors. Soldier recognized this name and told Tavish that the only thing Merasmus was doing at night was not the dishes. The wizard was his roommate and they had been having trouble lately. After all of these years, Merasmus had been close, really close actually. The wizard knew there was a party and believed he did not need an invite. After Merasmus insulted the food, Jane snapped his staff and a fight broke out. The wizard pronounced this vile party over and summoned the possessed eye of Tavish the Groot to fight the mercenaries, an entity he called Monoculus. Even still, Jane attempted to slap the magic out of Merasmus. The next day, after the defeat of Monoculus, Merasmus was surprised to see the soldier return home to their castle, and things simply went back to normal. Back in one of Red's headquarters, Dell discovered something odd. A piece of bread had been sent through one of his teleporters and had grown a tumor. He and Ludwig believed that if it happened to bread, it also happened to the mercenaries who used them every day. Under the impression that they were all going to die soon, Jeremy picked up the courage to finally ask out Miss Pauling. Spy agreed to help him, and over the next few days, Spy taught his son how to seduce women, dance, and the best pickup lines. It was an interesting moment between them, but they believed the end was near. Scout was also completely unaware Spy was his dad. To get Pauling's attention, Scout pressed a button that signaled an alarm for when the intelligence briefcase had been stolen. When she arrived, she was angry with Scout. She was only allowed 1 day off a year and he had ruined it. Meanwhile, Ludwig and Dell discovered that the bread did not contain a tumor. It was actually a self-aware birthmark that thrived only in pure wheat. Ludwig's prognosis was incorrect and the mercenaries were tumor-free. They let the rest of the team know that they would be fine as long as no more bread was teleported. But unknown to them, Soldier had spent the last 3 days teleporting bread. One of these had also turned into a bread monster. Alongside Miss Pauling, Team Fortress destroyed the creature, and although she had been upset with Scout, this turned out to be one of her best days. Going forward, Soldier was warned, no more teleporting bread. As 1971 arrived, the Gravel War had raged on for over 120 years. The brothers themselves were 149 years old. Each desperately held onto life and refused to leave this mortal realm before the other. Tired of waiting, Gray left the shadows and began his plan. He reached out to each brother with tear-stained letters, each letter forged to appear as if it were from the other. The letters suggested a truce, and after all of this time, both of them agreed to meet in person. For this historic meeting, Redmond and Blutarch rented the Alamo, a Spanish fortress founded in the 18th century, and moved it to New Mexico. Gray, of course, viewed this as a complete waste of money, but their stupidity did not surprise him. In this meeting, surrounded by engineers who kept them alive, Redmond and Blutarch spoke of how they had no heirs, and of how they believed the Mann bloodline would die with them because of their fruitless war. In coming together in this truce, they could fix this, and they knew exactly how to do it. Blutarch suggested they create a machine that would make one of them pregnant. Redmond also believed this was the perfect plan, yet when they discussed the letters that had been sent to them, they realized they had been tricked into this meeting. It was here that Gray introduced himself as their secret brother, but in their older age, they struggled to hear him. Redmond asked if this young man was mechanically inclined, if he would be able to help them with their pregnancy machine. Gray was incredibly intelligent, and he explained exactly who he was, of how he was born, stolen by an eagle, and forced to survive alone. As he told his tale, his Australian-powered immortality device glowed. His brothers had squandered his father's wealth, and he wanted what he was owed. He wanted the Badlands, Manco, and the Australium stored within its vaults. He deserved this. It was his birthright. His brothers had argued over worthless pits of gravel and wasted so much time on a foolish war. Redmond and Blutarch truly believed there was value in gravel. Whoever owned the gravel pits could be a god. Gray corrected them and informed them that the world ran on coal. These almost 150-year-old men refused to adapt or improve. Having spent enough time with his brothers and over a century of plotting, with 2 swift blows of a knife, Gray killed Redmond and then Blutarch. This left him as the final living son of Zephaniah Mann, and from here, he set his sights on what he believed was his birthright. That Mann family instinct had kicked in. The strongest sibling had survived, just not the one that Zephaniah thought it would be. With his work done, Gray left the Alamo. This, however, was not the end of his brother's story. Upon their deaths, the brothers became spirits, unable to move on without resolving their conflict. Blutarch was ecstatic. Although he had been murdered, he had outlived his brother by 7 seconds. Redmond, of course, disagreed, and they sought a way to settle this. The death of Redmond and Blutarch Mann put an end to the gravel war. Because of this, Team Fortress no longer had anyone to fight for. This moment was unexpected and forced the administrator to adapt. When he returned to Gray Gravel Co., Gray set his army of robots on every Manco facility on Earth. He planned to take the company, just like his brothers had fought against each other. A couple of days later, Saxton Hale was informed about the death of the brothers and that an attack was on the way, but Hale believed he had something more important to deal with. Within the Samdrup Jankar district of the Kingdom of Bhutan, Saxton had discovered the very last Yeti of his species. Although the team there had given it months of behavioral counseling and intense aromatherapy to curb its unspeakable savageness, Hale wanted to fight it. Saxton knew he would not have time to fly back to Manco to hire a team to defend his company from Gray's robots, so he recorded a recruitment video and had it delivered to TF Industries. With it, he fought the Yeti, and when the tape arrived in the Badlands through TF Industries, the mercenaries of Team Fortress were rehired to fight in a new war for Manco. The mercenaries were a little conscious to jump into another war, but when Miss Pauling explained that for some reason, Grey's robots ran on money, they accepted. This was not just a fight for Mann or Saxton Hale, it was a fight for their jobs. For some time, Team Fortress fought against robotic counterparts of themselves as they defended Manco facilities across the Badlands. Some of these included Big Rock, Coaltown, Decoy, Ghost Town, Manhattan, Manworks, and Rottenburg. Outside of the Man vs. Machine war, Merasmus continued to get frustrated with his roommate. Jane never cleaned up after himself, took his kill me, come back stronger pills, wore the wizard's robes, stretched them out, and often filled the toilets with sour cream. The final straw was when he used one of the magician's ancient artifacts as a bowl. This was a skull forged in hell that fed on souls, but the soldier did not care. To get rid of this nuisance, Merasmus kicked out the soldier and attempted to sell him as a familiar to other wizards in an advertisement in the Teufort Reader. He claimed the familiar was looking for his forever home, was not house-trained, but would be great for wizards who were just starting out. For just $3, free, or even a best offer, this familiar could be theirs. This issue of the Teufort Reader also included a request from Miss Pauling looking for companionship, who felt the pressure of her job. As Halloween approached, Merasmus prepared for and left the 1156th WizardCon in Minnesota, in which he had been invited to be a guest speaker. His topic was about living with a non-wizard. Everything seemed to have gone well. However, when he returned on the 31st, on Halloween, he discovered that he had not dealt with his roommate's problem as well as he had thought. Soldier had broken into his castle, raccoons wandered the lawn, they bit into the Abominomicon, a washing machine had been set on fire, a refrigerator had been sealed shut and was in the process of being buried. All of this commotion had also alerted the city of a raccoon infestation. Every raccoon in the greater Badlands area had moved into his castle of eldritch horror. Merasmus ensured the city employed that every raccoon would be destroyed within an hour, but this was not why she had been sent. The city had decided to annex the castle to turn it into a raccoon sanctuary. Soldier had also become the park ranger of this area. As a result, Jane was given the castle and Merasmus was kicked out. Merasmus had only wanted to live in peace, but Jane the soldier had once again ruined everything. In a rage, the wizard threatened to actually kill the soldier this time, but because Jane had taken the kill me come back stronger pills, this was impossible. So the wicked magician of dark magic went with a second option: to kill everyone Jane cared about. That evening, Merasmus waged war against Team Fortress. Unfortunately, even with his immense power, the wizard was defeated. Having lost everything, Merasmus left the Badlands and moved to Los Angeles. One evening at his castle of eldritch horror / raccoon sanctuary, Park Ranger Sergeant Jane Doe had a knock at the door. The spirits of the Mann brothers had seen his advertisement in the Teufort Bystander as a lawyer. They hoped his knowledge of the law could help them adjudicate their 100-year rivalry. In a rare moment of intelligence, Jane explained that none of them were completely dead, until one of them actually moved on to the other side. Their stalemate would continue. In response to this, both brothers attempted to send the other one to hell with the use of a pit to the netherworld. As the war between Manco and Grey's robot continued, under the supervision of Miss Pauling, Team Fortress saved the Manco Museum and a quicklime factory, amongst many other locations. The issue they had was that in just the Badlands alone, there were 306 Manco plants, office buildings, warehouses, and outlet malls. They could not be everywhere at once. Unknown to the team, however, Soldier had managed to infiltrate Grey Gravel Co. disguised in the robot costume he had worn for Halloween years before. The team at first did not believe him that the next assault would take place at the Manco facility at 20 Gravel Pit Way at exactly 1 PM, but when an army of robots arrived, they took him seriously. Over the next week, Miss Pauling, Mikhail, and Jane disguised themselves as robots and infiltrated Grey Gravel Co. for information. Grey was confused about how Team Fortress had managed to prepare for their attacks. It was only when he unveiled his latest robot, the Mecha Engineer, that it pointed out the humans in disguise. As the months continued into 1972, wherever Grey sent his robots, the mercenaries were ready for them. This was his worst nightmare. He had fallen into a stalemate, just like his idiot brothers. Having finally finished his business in Yeti Park, Saxton Hale returned to Manco with a stuffed Yeti, his trophy. As he did so, however, Grey Man entered his office with a small army of robots. He accepted that the war had turned into a stalemate because of the mercenaries' interference. He gave Saxton this win and then offered him a new proposition: all or nothing, the Manco Challenge. This policy stated that the CEO of any other company could take over as the CEO of Manco legally if they beat the current CEO in unarmed combat. This was one of the policies Saxton himself had implemented. Grey was a lot smaller than Saxton, and he happily accepted this offer. As with everything Grey Man did, not all was as it seemed, but before he could reveal his trick, Saxton began to hit him over and over again. When he was finally able to speak, Grey revealed that he was no longer in fact the CEO of Grey Gravel Co. His daughter Olivia was. Saxton Hale was known for his love of fighting. He had literally just fought a Yeti, but when it came to a little girl, he could not bring himself to do it. He asked his assistant Bidwell to fight her instead. When he refused, Reddy refused. Olivia followed her father's instructions and fought Hale, and when he did not fight back, little Olivia Mann was appointed as the CEO of Manco through the Manco Challenge. Distraught, Saxton Hale left his former office, then the country. Grey then took the mantle of CEO from his daughter. With this power, he fired the mercenaries and looked ahead to his next task, to find which vault the administrator had hidden away her Australium. As for Helen, as soon as she discovered that Grey had become CEO of Manco, she fled and left a warning for Miss Pauling to hide. Without anyone to stop him, Grey began to work through the maze of shell companies Manco had created in order to hide their assets. Meanwhile, Helen reached out to Del Conager and asked for his help. He already knew of his grandfather's relationship with Elizabeth, what Australium was, and how it functioned from the documents found in Radigan's grave. In doing so, he disappeared from the face of the planet and used the administrator's access to empty the Australian vaults before Grey could find it. With Team Fortress disbanded, the rest of the mercenaries moved away to start again. Mikhail returned to watch over his family in the Jugdur Mountains, Tavish moved back in with his mother in their mansion, and Pyro moved to the city. Without any money to pay for the Raccoon Sanctuary, previously known as Castle Merasmus, Soldier was evicted. Scout was kind enough to help him move out, but in the process, Jane accidentally broke both of Jeremy's arms. After this, the Soldier moved to Los Angeles. It was here he found a cave lined with gold and made it his home to protect it. However, this was not gold. He did not understand what he had stumbled upon. 2 weeks after Spy had lost his job, without a voice to command him and with Gray in charge, he decided it would be best to lay low for a while. However, when he planned to leave, Jeremy asked to come with him. Well, not with him, but for a lift to Teufort so that he could get all of his savings inside of his bank account there. Spy just wanted to leave, but when Jeremy mentioned how upset his mother would be if she found out he had lost all of his savings, Spy allowed him into the car. It was clear the Spy still cared for Scout's mother after 27 years, so the duo left for Teufort. In Australia, Mr. Mundy returned to find that both of his parents had passed away. As he began to clear away their house, he discovered the truth, that they were not his real parents, and if anyone did know anything, it would be Miss Pauling and the administrator. He just had to wait to find out the truth. In another part of the country, Saxton Hale did something he never thought he would do. He travelled to Darling Zoos. If there was anyone who could help him get his company back, it would be Charles Darling. But as soon as he arrived and saw all of the poor, captured animals behind bars, locked away so that no one could fight them, he lost his temper and burned most of the zoo down. As a consequence, he was arrested and sent to Millhaven Ultra Prison for dangerous men. Finally, there was Mr. Ludwig. He missed his team after it had disbanded. He also missed the black market organs and test subjects he had been able to get through TF Industries. During this period, he discovered that Team Fortress Classic was active once again, funded by someone new, Greyman. This team had lost their medic, and Ludwig was the perfect fit. Gray knew that although Team Fortress was no more, these mercenaries could still be an issue, so he hoped Team Fortress Classic would help keep him on his winning streak. The Classic Heavy was completely against the hiring of Ludwig, but Gray was in charge. When Scout and Spy eventually arrived in Teufort, Spy was surprised to find that Jeremy had spent almost every dime he had earned on 12 cubic yards on Tom Jones memorabilia. He believed that this would be worth a fortune in the future. Spy called him an imbecile. Tom Jones was only in his 20s, the most virile man in the world, and he had no enemies. He was virtually immortal. Scout claimed they were simply an investment. Meanwhile, this was a big day for the people of Teufort. They wanted justice for the victims of what they dubbed the Teufort 9. Portions of their town had been destroyed several times and innocents had been caught in the crossfire. With the opportunity, Scout and Spy were arrested for their part in the destruction of Teufort. As a part of Team Fortress Classic, Mr. Ludwig took advantage of every opportunity he had. He spent the entire medical budget on zoo parts and then began to experiment on his teammates. He was especially interested in how baboon uteruses interacted with a human host. Both the Classic Heavy and Greg the Demoman were unknowing test subjects in this endeavor. In secret, Helen the Administrator hunted down every ounce of Australium she could with the help of Dell. She lied, cheated, and killed. On the other side of this war, in May, Gray and his team tracked down one of the last natural sources of Australium in Australia, Uluru, also regarded as Ayers Rock by some European explorers. This was the reserve Australia had hidden away from the world with a hollow shell of balsa wood and styrofoam. Without a supply of Australium for the first time in over a century, the people of Australia lost their muscles, moustaches, and bright minds. They became regular Australians. Alongside this, Gray began another venture, a robot designed to leach any Australium out of the blood of its target. If he could perfect this design and unleash an army of them on Australia, his Australium troubles would be over. If he could store as much of this as possible, he could become immortal through his device. 6 whole months after Grey had taken over Manco and the world's supply of Australium had disappeared, Helen reached out to Miss Pauling through a letter with a simple instruction: assemble the team. Without hesitation, Pauling got to work. First, she sought out Jane in Los Angeles. It was not a coincidence that the soldier had travelled to the same place Merasmus had fled to after he had lost his castle. When he arrived, he had done some research. Merasmus was happy, had got a new home and an even more interesting roommate, the Tom Jones. Jane had lost everything, and he did not like that Merasmus was so happy. To pay the bills, Jane had taken on the role of a tour guide of celebrities' homes and iconic locations. Dick Van Dyke's home and the log in which the soldier had killed and buried the Beatles were just 2 of many. On this tour, however, he added another home to show to the tourists: the home of Tom Jones. To give his followers the best view possible, he broke into the home and then by impulse snapped Tom Jones's neck. The opportunity was there and he had to take it. In this moment, upstairs, Merasmus heard what he believed to be popcorn cracking. When this poor, defeated wizard realized that his roommate, and possibly more, had been killed by the plague that was a soldier, he asked what he had done to deserve this. Jane explained that he was sad and he did not like seeing his ex-roommate so happy. In Merasmus's 6,000 years of life, agreeing to be soldier's roommate was his only regret. This man had taken everything from him: his sanity, castle, and now Tom Jones. But his pain was not over. On her mission for the administrator, Miss Pauling tracked down Soldier's exact location and put on a police outfit. When Merasmus opened the door, happy that Soldier may finally get what he deserved, Miss Pauling asked the magician to check Tom Jones's pulse so that his fingerprints would be on him for when the real police arrived. As a result, Merasmus was arrested for the murder of Tom Jones. Free from any danger, Pauling and Soldier moved on to their next mercenary, Pyro, who they discovered had somehow become the CEO of Frontier Engineering. Meanwhile, at the Manco Monkey Knot Company vault, Grey and his daughter finally believed that, through months of searching, countless shell companies had found the vault that the administrator had hidden away her £200,000 of Australium. But as they opened it, Grey was once again disappointed. She was always one step ahead. He needed the Australium not only for his grander plan of world domination, but also to refuel his Australian-powered immortality device that had begun to run low. Over the following days, Pauling rehired Tavish from his mansion as Team Fortress Classic searched the administrator's old secret office in Bilious Gorge for clues, but the trail was cold. As Pauling, Tavish, Jane and Pyro moved on to their next mercenary, they discussed their plan of action. Mikhail was in Serbia, Sniper was in Australia, Dell had disappeared completely, and Medic had taken a job and also disappeared. As for Scout and Spy, well, after Pyro happened to cut off Soldier's hand and they had to go to a vet's office, Pauling saw a newspaper article about their trial. The duo was sentenced to be hanged in Teufort, so they had to get there first. Over in Australia, at the Millhaven Ultra Prison for Dangerous Men, Saxton Hale was released, and to his surprise, Maggie had come to pick him up. Even though they had grown apart over these years, she still cared for him. She asked what he had done: tax evasion, check fraud, surely nothing dangerous or physical. With Maggie, he could be vulnerable and explain that he had lost his company and, in his desperation, had almost asked Charles Darling for help, but had lost his temper. Even though he had left her for his father's company, Maggie still offered to help. She knew exactly who to ask, even if Saxton did not like it. Her boss, Charles Darling, would be able to help. Upon their arrival in Teufort, Pauling asked Tavish and Jane to head to the courthouse to find out where they were keeping Scout and Spy, as she went to meet with the administrator in a secret meeting in an alley middle of 7th and Main. As for Pyro, they went to the library to look at the books. In this meeting, Pauling gave Helen an update of how she had Pyro, Soldier and Demo with her, tracked down most of the rest, but she did not know where Medic and the Engineer were. Helen kept her cards close to her chest, and although a little snappy with her assistant, she did tell her that she was proud of her, but there was still more to do. From the shadows, the administrator hid her appearance. It was clear from what was visible that she had not fueled her immortality device with Australium in a while, and she really needed Pauling's help. Helen told her not to worry about finding Dell or the medic, that over the past 6 months she had lied, cheated and killed to attain as much of the 89,000 tons of Australium in existence as she could. Now, there was only one cache of the element left that she could not reach in the sunken nation of New Zealand, and she wanted Pauling and the mercenaries to get it for her. The issue was that she believed both Grey Man and Charles Darling were also after it and her mercenaries. As she departed, Helen left Pauling with one more thing. The coordinates of her secret hideout, a place to meet her once the Australium had been retrieved. This hideout was located in the Organ Needle, a mountain range in New Mexico. This place was located about 4 miles away from the town of White Sands and the White Sands Missile Range. This was a huge day for the people of Teufort. They believed they would finally get justice for everything the Teufort 9 had done. Well, at least 2 of them, but not all was as it seemed. The mayor had blamed them over the years for mistakes he had made. He had accidentally rezoned the town's only school into a parking lot, which had forced the children to learn in a casino, and a pizzeria had been forced to close down when a city dump had been requisitioned in the middle of the town square. Yet, the people believed the mayor when he told them these things had been orchestrated by the mercenaries. Around the city, popcorn stands were set up and mercenary dolls put up for sale. Inside of the courthouse, Mayor Mike was ready to declare them guilty without a trial, but he was told by Scout's lawyer that they actually needed one. But when Jane and Tavish entered the courtroom and Jane accidentally snapped the neck of the lawyer, the 4 of them were sentenced to hanging. Over in the library, Miss Pauling sought out something very specific. The last copy of a genealogy record created in 1850. With confirmation from the librarian that there was no other copy, she dropped it into a fire created by Pyro. This record specifically was of someone called Helen. Whoever Helen the administrator really was, or connected to. She did not want anyone to know. Thanks to Miss Pauling, they never would. The assistant had worked for TF Industries for around 10 years, and when she discovered that Scout, Spy, Soldier and Demoman were all set to hang, she was not surprised. Their actions without her supervision normally ended this way, and as usual, she got them out of trouble. Miss Pauling explained that the issues the people of Teufort had with the mercenaries were issues that were outside of their power. It was Mayor Mike who had made all of these mistakes. The mayor also did not have the power to hang people. After a civics lesson, the mercenaries were set free and the people of Teufort looked to the future, with a mayor who wanted to learn how to be a mayor. With everyone safe, Miss Pauling began the next stage of her plan. She sent Jeremy, Jane and Pyro to Serbia to get heavy, while she, Spy, and Tavish left for Australia to get Mr. Mundy. In preparation, she even left a message at a store Mikhail traveled to, but when he received it, he chose to ignore it. His family was more important. Upon their arrival at Darling Manor, Maggie explained to Saxton what had happened to her after he had left her. She felt like she had lost her spark, went through many husbands who did not survive more than a week, and eventually accepted a job with their nemesis. If there was anyone to help Hale beat Grey Man, it was Charles. In this meeting, Charles agreed to help, but under his own conditions. His study was home to many animals, the last of their kind, and he wanted them to live forever. If Hale could get him Australium, he would help. Saxton knew his vaults had Australium, but Charles corrected him. Through his own ways, he knew that the administrator had spent 150 years stockpiling Australium, and that she had also stolen it from Manco's vaults after Grey's victory. He did, however, believe he knew of an Australium reserve Grey and Helen had not discovered. If Hale could find it, he would help. So Saxton and Mags left for a private plane. As Soldier, Scout, and Pyro arrived in the freezing Jogja Mountains, Soldier asked the shopkeeper where Heavy was. She explained that he came to the store once a month and it would be best to wait for him to return as the cold, the storms, and the animals here were deadly. Yet, Jane believed that this was some sort of communist plot to keep him away from his friend. So he ignored the warning and pushed Scout and Pyro forward towards the mountains. On their way, they suffered from the cold, hunger, discovered the long-lost plane of missing explorer and hot dog businesswoman Amelia Earhart, and fought against bears. Unknown to them, this victory was short-lived as these bears were just children, and their mother was angry. To their luck, Mikhail happened to be close. He had not been in a fight since the end of the war with Grey, and with a lot of pent-up aggression, he took down this bear with ease. It had been over a week since Miss Pauling and the mercenaries had left Teufort, and always a step behind. Grey entered the library and requested the genealogy records of 1850, only to discover they had been destroyed. He had no idea how one mousy little girl and a group of morons had managed to stay ahead of him. In the background, Team Fortress Classic did get a lead on them, finally, but their mission was to discover the location of the administrator. To do that, they decided to simply just follow Pauling in the hopes she would lead them to her. Back in Serbia, Mikhail introduced Soldier and Pyro to his mother at their cabin as Jeremy took a nap. When he woke up, he was greeted by Zana. She had not seen a friendly man other than her brother since they had fled, and she wanted something from him. Yet, Jeremy only had one woman in mind, Miss Pauling. Because this tiny man with lots of words did not give her what she wanted, Zana left the room and discovered Soldier. He was more than happy to comply. The return of Mikhail's other sisters, Yana and Bronislava, led to a family meal and meeting. Scout explained that Miss Pauling had put the team back together, that she needed him, but the Heavy believed his family needed him more. For most of their lives, he had provided for and protected them from evil men, since the evil men had taken their father away from him. The girls, however, revealed that during their big brother Misha's time in America, evil men had come. They butchered them like hogs and their screams had died on their lips. They had not told him because they did not want him to worry. He was enjoying his time in the Badlands. It was time for him to move on with his life, and time for them to move on with theirs. They hated living in a cabin, and more than that, they hated bear meat. With this permission from his family, Mikhail asked if the mission would be dangerous, if there would be dangerous men, and if he could destroy them. To all of these, Jeremy said yes. With their freedom, Yana planned to go to Paris, Bronislava to New York. As for Zana, she had other plans. She was quite taken with Soldier and she wanted to go with and help him. So, she did. As Miss Pauling was informed by Jeremy that Heavy was back for the next stage of the plan, she asked that all of the mercenaries come to Australia for different missions. Miss Pauling planned to track down Mr. Mundy with Tavish. She sent Jeremy and Heavy to Uluru to investigate the Australian mine, and Jane and Spy to recover a submarine so that they could access New Zealand, in which Zana joined them. From a distance, Team Fortress Classic watched Pauling's every move for Grey. On their way to the Uluru Katachuta National Park, Scout asked why they had to go there. Heavy knew there would be no Australium, but they could get answers to who had taken it and where it had gone. In an awkward moment of silence, Jeremy blurted out, "So your dad's dead, huh?" He then confessed that his dad had disappeared. Heavy knew more than most and just responded with, "Yes, your father disappears often." He knew who Jeremy's father was. Meanwhile, at the naval submarine base, Zana and Soldier planned their attack. They expected heavy resistance, unaware that the Australians had lost their strength. Spy was stuck with them. After many searches of possible locations, Pauling and Tavish believed they had finally tracked down Mundy at his parents' house. When they entered, he attacked and knocked them out. At the submarine base, before Zana and Soldier entered, Jane gave her something important, a partial necklace of human ears. This signified a proposal. In high spirits, Spy approached the sailors as Jane and Zana performed a couple's neck snap, but they were confused. Australians were meant to be the strongest fighters in the world, yet these were weak. Spy explained the situation of how they had lost their strength as the sailors handed over the keys to the submarine without a fight. They had completed their mission, and as the trio waited for Miss Pauling to arrive, they helped the injured recover. Over at Ayers Rock, Scout and Heavy discovered the Australians' trick, that this whole thing was just a hollow shell made out of balsa wood and styrofoam. Inside, they found the Australian reserve depleted, but this was not all they discovered. This was also where Charles Darling had sent Saxton Hale and Mags. Together, they decided it would be best to work together to track down who had stolen the element, and in doing so, Hale would be able to get his company back. When Pauling and Tavish finally woke up, Sniper put the demo man back to sleep with some homemade moonshine. As for the assistant, Mr. Mundy had questions and he knew she had the answers. He described how he had lost his parents, well, not his real parents, and wanted to know the truth. Mundy had prepared to torture her for this information, but she just told him. His parents were in New Zealand, and that is where they were off to after they had picked him up. Pauling had collected the final member of Team Fortress she could, and with him left to meet Spy and Soldier at the Naval Marine Base. Now, Dell the engineer had not been seen in over 6 months by his former team, but he had been seen frequently by the administrator in her secret base. Through what Australium was left and his knowledge passed down through the generations, he upgraded her immortality device to the Mark V. This design ran much leaner and on a quarter of the Australium the Mark IV had used. Helen appreciated Dell and his family for everything they had done for her over the past 150 years. She knew that when she ran out of Australium, she would die, but she just needed enough to settle an old debt. Deep under the ocean, Pyro, Sniper, Zana, Pauling, Spy, Soldier, and Demoman ventured close to the fallen, sunken nation of New Zealand. Pauling hoped to find the Australian Helen had told her about. Inside, Sniper was greeted and welcomed home by the last living people in this lost land. His birth parents, Bilbel and Lana, they told him of how the nation had fallen and how he, Mundy, had been accidentally sent into space. Since then, everyone drowned. They were stuck in this lab, and Lana became dependent on wine. This all made sense to Mundy, how he never grew a moustache, Australia-shaped chest hair, or why he never wanted to fistfight the other children. He was not Australian. Miss Pauling was more interested in the lost cache of Australium. Bilbel claimed to know exactly what these big yellow rocks were for and how valuable they were, but he was wrong. He did not know that it could hyperextend the human lifespan. He had used it to paint his prototype spaceships, and many of them had exploded. This one here was the final one. As Pauling realized just how stupid Mundy's father was and shared some wine with Lana, Bilbel asked how his son had returned from space. Mundy explained he never reached space. He'd landed on a farm and been raised as an Australian. There was no magma, no fire. The world was fine. Lana realized her life had been stolen from her. In a moment of anger, she entered the final prototype rocket coated in Australium with a bottle of wine and launched herself into space. This was the last known cache of Australium on Earth, and Pauling felt defeated. She had failed the administrator. The launch of the rocket created a giant hole in the ceiling that subsequently allowed water to flood into this lab. The team attempted to escape to the submarine, but ever selfish, Bilbel stole it and left them to their fate. Mundy had just met his birth parents, but they had both abandoned him so quickly. Then the door to the rest of the city opened once again, but it was not Bilbel. It was something far worse. Team Fortress Classic. They had watched from afar as long as possible, but without their intervention, Team Fortress would die, and with it, any information they had about the administrator. During their arrival, the Classic Heavy shot Mundy as his team watched helplessly as he bled out. This was the best and worst day of his life. Around 6 hours later, the Team Fortress Classic mercenaries returned to Gray's base of operations, Gray Gravel Co., with the body of Sniper and the rest of the administrator's team. The Classic Heavy gave Gray an update on what had happened and told him that he would have the location of Helen in just 1 hour. His team were good at interrogation and pulling information from prisoners. The Heavy wondered why someone like Gray wanted to dominate the world at such an old age. Was it really worth it if they did not have that much time left? Gray revealed just how old he was, 150, and that he intended to live forever. The Heavy did not like how dismissive Gray was. The money he paid him and his team was good, but the ability to live forever was worth so much more than that. So he turned on his employer. Below in interrogation, Beatrice attempted to find out as much as she could from Soldier as a restrained Zana watched. He had dreamt about the day he would be tortured for valuable information, but the interrogation part of this meeting was cut short when he revealed that he did not know where the administrator was. Only Miss Pauling did. He did want to be interrogated though. It was clear that Jane had nothing the Classic Pyro needed, but before she could torture him for fun, her Heavy arrived with Gray as a new prisoner and person to torture. Before he left, the Classic Heavy also pulled Gray's immortality device from his back. This immobilized him and left Mann the weakest he had been in over 100 years. Resourceful as ever, Zana managed to cut off her hand and with the other, trap the pyro in her suit with a grenade. In doing this, Jane felt even closer to her. In a very rare, desperate moment for Gray, he begged the duo to take him with them to Miss Pauling. He knew he was dying without his device and he needed to speak to her. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, as Tavis struggled with alcohol withdrawal, Pauling and Spy discussed their situation. The assistant felt that she had screwed up. Spy believed the opposite. In her time as their administrator, only one of them had died. Considering what they had been through, that was commendable. To evade torture, Spy offered to share half of his cyanide tablets with her, but before they could swallow, Mikhail walked in. The Heavy told them that the island was full of robots and that he would fight them to give his team a head start to escape. All he needed was the coordinates of the administrator. Miss Pauling did not notice how suspicious this behavior was and openly gave him this information. As soon as the coordinates were revealed, Heavy transformed into the classic Spy. She had been tricked. With this information, Greg the Demoman and Spy were ordered to kill the captives, but upon the arrival of Zana and Soldier, two more of the classic mercenaries joined Beatrice in death. At the end of his life, Gray asked for the help of Miss Pauling and her mercenaries. She was angry. Why would she listen to him? He had cost all of them their jobs, had them captured and tortured, and got Sniper killed. He claimed that, yes, sure, he would have done awful things with the power all of that Australian would have given him, but he promised that whatever Helen had planned was so much worse. His last request for them was to stop her. This did not go down well with the assistant. She had lied, killed, and framed people for the administrator. She knew exactly who she was and would be right by her side when she did whatever her grand plan was. This was a great speech by Pauling, but during, Gray passed away without her noticing. The death of Grey Mann was yet another significant moment in this twisted timeline. He was the last of the Mann brothers and left only his daughter, Olivia Mann, as the last man standing. From him, she inherited everything, Manco and the Badlands. In Mr. Ludwig's lab, he looked down at his friend, the Sniper. He had been murdered, and the medic felt that it was up to him to bring him back. Meanwhile, in what was either a hallucination or a real spiritual state, Mundy found himself in heaven with the parents who had raised him. He was told he would have to return to Earth soon, but he did not want to. He wanted to be with them. They told him he was a professional and there were still rotten people down there who needed to be killed. Then there was a flash and he saw Ludwig. In this crowning medical achievement, Mr. Ludwig had brought someone back from the dead, but Mundy had a big issue with who he thought was his friend. The last thing Mr. Mundy had seen before he had bled out was the medic's smug, evil grin, and with this fresh in his mind, the Sniper lashed out. Ludwig was confused. That was just how he smiled. He had been happy to see his friend. He had only joined them in the first place because the team had disbanded. He needed access to black market organs and test subjects, and they needed a medic. It was nothing personal. Ludwig actually liked Sniper. With this issue dealt with, Sniper asked if what he had seen was real. Was that heaven? Ludwig explained that it was just a hallucination, while Sniper truly believed it was real. This made him the most dangerous person on the island. He knew what was waiting for him. Despite this incredible achievement, the classic Heavy was furious. He had killed the Sniper because he wanted him dead. He did not want him brought back. In a rage, he stamped on Archimedes. As Ludwig revived his bird and was ordered to kill his friend, Sniper ran away, and the Heavy was informed that 3 of his men had been killed by Team Fortress. The Heavy wanted revenge, and he knew exactly how to get it for the departed classic Spy, Demoman, and Pyro. Yet, the Heavy was not the only person who wanted revenge. This man had injured Archimedes and hurt Ludwig's friends. The medic knew that if he was patient, he would get his chance. Eventually. As Miss Pauling, Spy, Tavish, Jane, Pyro, and Zana looked for a way to escape, all around them they heard the ramblings of the classic Heavy. To finally stop them, he activated and unleashed one of Grey's projects, the Army of Leech Robots. These were programmed to suck the Australium out of the blood of the mercenaries, but as theirs did not contain any of the element, the robots would keep going until they were dead. One by one, Pauling and her mercenaries fell. However, when it came to Tavish, the robots began to malfunction. His blood was so full of alcohol that it poisoned them. During this, Medic was finally reunited with his team, and as fast as he could, he poured their blood back into them. It was not an exact science as their blood types mixed, and he even used his underwear to sponge blood out of the puddles, but it worked. In the robot control room, the classic soldier, scout, and engineer asked their Heavy how they were going to get paid for their work if their boss was dead. To the Heavy, this was worth so much more than money. He held a device in his hand that could grant him and his men immortality. The issue for Fred was that there was only one device. He believed himself to be a fantastic engineer, but the replication of something so advanced was so far out of his capability. Instead, he offered his services in another way. Team Fortress had once again survived a deadly attack and angered the Heavy, but Grey did have a ton of robots from when he had waged war against Manco. With a possible solution to this problem, the Heavy ordered Fred to get them running. After their adventure at Ayers Rock, Mags, Saxton, Jeremy, and Mikhail were led to Grey's Island in their investigation of the missing Australium. The Scout and Heavy jumped out of the plane above the island as the other two recounted stories of their previous adventures. Mikhail was surprised to find that his sister was on the island. He was even more surprised and worried when he saw her necklace of human ears. He knew exactly what this meant. Soldier had proposed and Zana would soon bear his child. With everyone back together, Jeremy updated Pauling of how there was no Australium, but had found Saxton Hale and his girlfriend. In the distance, however, there was a rumble. Hundreds of robot doppelgangers of Team Fortress. Even without weapons or a way to defend themselves, they came together to fight until the very end. In the sky, Hale and Mags realized just how long they had been talking for. They missed each other and even discussed maybe running Manco together if they were able to get the company back. When they looked down at the island and saw the battle that was about to begin, they decided to get involved. They also came with Manco weapons. This made the Heavy very happy. He had missed Sasha's voice, and with weapons, the mercenaries, along with Zana, Miss Pauling, and Mags, got to work. From afar, Virgil, the classic sniper, lined up a shot, but he was interrupted by Fred. Well, not Fred. Virgil's robot eye installed by the real Fred saw right through the spy's illusion, and he shot him in the leg. Before Virgil could indulge in his sadistic, torturous tendencies, Mr. Mundy put this classic sniper down. Meanwhile, outside of the battle, Ludwig patched up Tavish's knee. With access to alcohol again, the Demoman asked the medic an important question. This man was incredibly talented and had been able to bring someone back from the dead. He wondered why Ludwig had not come up with a way to regrow his eye. The medic explained that he had, many times, but every Halloween the eye had grown bat wings, and as a group they had had to fight it. The conclusion was that the eye socket itself was haunted and there was nothing Ludwig could do about it. To get Tavish to forget about it and to stop asking, the medic had scooped out that part of his brain. Satisfied with the answer, Tavish left to help his teammates with their conflict. As for Ludwig, he was given the opportunity he had waited for. The classic Heavy's attempts to destroy the mercenaries had been thwarted at every turn, but he still had one more thing he wanted: to become immortal. To do this, he ordered that this Frankenstein, the medic, help him. He was smart enough to know that Ludwig would kill him if he was put under during an operation to attach the immortality device, so his plan was to get the medic to explain the procedure to one of his guys. With burning vengeance for the brutal assault on Archimedes, Ludwig reached for his bone saw and slashed the Heavy in the face. Off balance, the brute went in for a retaliatory strike, but fast on his feet, the medic dodged it and plunged the saw into his opponent's abdomen. This should have been enough to put him down, but the Heavy stood back up. He pounced at Ludwig and beat him. There was nothing the medic could say at this point to calm the man's fury, but Ludwig did have a very close relationship with a Heavy who had discovered the location of his friend, and he did not like to see him in pain. Having played his part in the robot rampage, Mikhail stood over the classic Heavy with Sasha. Yet, Mikhail was a man of honor and he promised the Heavy a good death, but his opponent was not a good man. In a split second, the Heavy shot Ludwig several times. From the medic's perspective, everything went to black and then orange as he appeared in hell. It had been a long time since Mr. Ludwig had met with the devil. Hell had upheld their end of whatever the contract was, and they wanted him to uphold his. They wanted his soul. Yet, he explained the loophole in the contract of how he now held the majority stake of his soul after he had surgically attached 8 others to it. The devil was angry, but he had no power. The medic suggested he should be sent back to Earth for another 50 years. He fed into the devil's ego and told him that surely hell would be smart enough to claim the rest of the souls and regain the majority stake in that time. If the devil could do that, he could then send the medic to hell permanently. Back on Earth, Ross the soldier and Greg the scout prepared their weapons to help kill the mercenaries who had killed their friends. To them, not everything was about money. Maybe after this, together, they could clear out an old safe house and turn it into an orphanage. There, they would have an endless supply of free kids to, well, before Greg could finish whatever that thought was, Pyro put them down. Because of this, only Fred the engineer and the Heavy remained from Team Fortress Classic. Over on the battlefield, as the number of robots dwindled, Jane and Zana, alongside Jeremy, Pauling, Saxon, and Mags, worked together and destroyed every robot they saw. However, Jeremy was hit and he crawled away to safety. As he did, Spy and Sniper found him. Spy could see just how injured his son was, and he truly believed it could be the end. He could not tell him how he felt as himself, so he left and turned into Tom Jones. Spy told his son of how 27 years before, he had dropped a sex bomb on his mother and ran away. But now, the fallout of that bomb had caught up with him. As Jeremy died, Spy, as Tom Jones, told him that he was proud of him and would always be proud of his son. As the scout ascended to heaven, he was greeted by God. Jeremy was told that he was God's gift to all of the women on Earth, and they should maybe pay for not having sex with him. The scout calmed him down and told him that they were all good people at heart. They were just doing their best. To this, God decided to send Scout back to have another chance. He also predicted that he would see him for real on the 4th of December 1987. In reality, this whole scenario was likely a hallucination, as Medic had Scout's soul. On the battlefield, as another wave of robots arrived, Pauling answered a phone call from Dell. He really needed the Australian cash from New Zealand, but Pauling told him it was gone. She had failed. Dell knew this was bad. The administrator had died, she just needed more Australium to be revived. They did have some, but it was very limited. The death of Ludwig had made Mikhail extremely angry. His protective nature had come through and he beat the classic heavy with everything he had. But the heavy did not play by the same rules. He grabbed the immortality device and jammed it into his open wound. This made him so much stronger and almost invulnerable. It was only when Mr. Ludwig returned to Earth after his new deal with the devil that the heavy stopped beating Mikhail. In his hand, he held a pen designed to look like something more technical. This pen had been sold to him in exchange for one of his souls, but to the heavy, Mr. Ludwig claimed it was an inducer. A device designed to induce the labor of the baby baboons within the baby baboon uterus the Mad Doctor had implanted inside of his enemy. With the heavy distracted and horrified by Ludwig, Mikhail took the opportunity and ripped the poorly inserted immortality device from the heavy. In doing so, the leader of Team Fortress Classic fell and grew weak. Mikhail was impressed. Only the medic could come up with a bluff that insane, but it was not a bluff. Sure, the pen he held was not the real inducer, but he did have one in his supply chest. When he found it, he activated it and a baby baboon was born. When the final robots were destroyed, Pauling and the rest of the mercenaries joined Mikhail and Ludwig on the beach. Even after everything he had gone through, the classic heavy held on. He asked how he had been beaten by Helen's rejects. His team had hunted down Team Echelon, Team Citadel, and Team Vanguard. How had he lost? In the background, Ludwig did say it was because his team did not have souls. But to Miss Pauling, it was because they were Team Fortress. 4 hours after her death, over at the secret base in the Organ Needle, the administrator was brought back by an infusion of Australium into her immortality device. Dell told her that Miss Pauling had failed, and that there was only one more dose of Australium left on the planet. With the Mark V of the immortality device, this Australium could give her as much as 5 or 6 months of life. Dell had never asked Helen what her old debt was that she had mentioned several times, and he was sorry that she would never be able to accomplish whatever it was. Helen had tried to keep it going for as long as she could. She even thought she was done once, but she craved it, the torment of Zephaniah Mann, for what had been taken away from her when she was a little girl. In this moment, Helen took all of the Australium at once. This cut down her lifespan from 6 months down to just an hour, unless she found more Australium. If these were her final moments, she wanted them to be with Zephaniah. All of his sons were dead, and she wanted him to know. Dell had no idea what her plan was, and he knew she would not tell him. Back at Grey Gravel Co., the mercenaries celebrated their victory, but Pauling was still disappointed. She believed she had failed the administrator. As far as she knew, there was no more Australium. With time to propose properly, Jane got down on his knee and handed Zana a pin from his grenade as a ring. She said yes. Yet, Misha did not approve of this. He had always wanted the best for his sister, and he told her that Jane could not support her. In response, Jane asked why everybody thought he had no money. He revealed that his home, his cave, was lined with gold, and he pulled out a piece to show Misha. But this was not gold. Somehow, Jane had stumbled upon an undiscovered cache of Australium. A cache Miss Pauling hoped to use to leverage a promotion, or to become the administrator's second in command. Having failed their task to acquire Australium, Saxton plotted another way to get his company back without the help of Charles Darling. After everything they had been through over the past few years, Maggie was disappointed. She had seen the old Saxton and had loved having him back, but it was clear to her she would never compete with his love of Manco. So, she left him. Disappointed by her disappearance, Saxton stole a plane and flew to get his company back. In high spirits, and although Saxton Hale had stolen a plane Miss Pauling planned to use to meet with the administrator, the team found a smaller plane and arrived in the Organ Needle, the secret headquarters of TF Industries. Inside, the mercenaries were reunited with Dell. Around them, they admired the statues and photos of the other teams as the workers of the shadowy organization continued on with their work. Dell told Pauling that the administrator was in a room, down the hall, last door on the left. A room he, his father and grandfather had never stepped into. Only Helen knew what was in there. As they entered and ventured down a spiral staircase, Jeremy finally told Flo how he felt about her, and how maybe there were other women out there he did not have to wear down to get some attention. Pauling had not intended to lead the scout on. He was just not her type. Besides, she claimed that there were probably women out there who were much hotter than she was. It was just math. With the turn of a key, Pauling and her mercenaries finally discovered the big secret, the grand reveal, Helen and her prisoner, and how she had used Australium to keep him alive to watch his son's gravel war. This shattered Flo Pauling. She thought Helen had a huge, diabolical plan, but it was just a petty revenge scheme. Helen did not even remember why she hated Zephaniah so much. As her hour came to an end, the administrator asked her assistant if she had discovered more Australium, and as Pauling held the element behind her back, she lied to her boss for the first time. No. Even still, in her final seconds, Helen believed everything she had done was worth it. The deceit, murders, wars, Australium caches, it was all worth it to punish Zephaniah Mann. As the last of the Australium ran out of both Helen and Zephaniah Mann's systems, they crumbled to dust. This really was the end. The last petty war was over. Upon his arrival at Manco, Saxton stormed in and reclaimed his company from Olivia. He became her legal guardian and hired her. Without a boss or a purpose, Miss Pauling felt lost. She still had a piece of Australium and knew where more of it was, but it did not mean anything anymore. Dell suggested that she mine every ounce of the element and drop it into a deep trench, start over, find something new, and with this suggestion, she left. So too did the rest of the mercenaries, this time for good. Without a war to fight in, over the following years, life went on. Merasmus acclimated to prison life in the Badlands Correctional Institute. Free from soldier, he hit the weights and for the first time in his life, became feared by other people. Zana was crafted a replacement hand, likely by Dell, and after she married Jane the soldier, he impregnated her and they had 2 children, General Patton Doe and Georgia Washington Doe. For the scout, finally over Miss Pauling, he met many women, and from them came 4 children. Sadly, the women all left him and he was forced to raise the kids alone. To support himself, he sued the city of Teufort for all of the injuries he had taken over his years as a mercenary. Over at Manco, over the years, Olivia entered her teenage years and hated the place. She was only a child when her father had pushed her into his plan of global domination, and she wanted to be free, to explore the world. Interestingly enough, so did Saxton. 7 years after the war had come to an end, in the winter of 1979, Jane borrowed 12,000 won from the Korean mafia, only he did not use his name for the loan. He used the name Merasmus. He needed money, and without the gold Miss Pauling had taken from his cave, he felt it was his only option. On a random day, Merasmus turned to see a hole in his cell, and from it came Jane, Zana, and his children. One of them, with the encouragement of his mother, managed to snap the neck of T-Bone. They wanted their children to meet Uncle Merasmus and maybe babysit them after they had broken him out, but Merasmus loved it here. This was his home, but once again, with the soldier came torment, this time in the form of the Korean mafia who believed Merasmus owed them money. Jane was genuinely excited to see Merasmus after all of this time. He saw him as a best friend and wanted to tell him about what had happened during his time in prison. As his wife and kids left, Jane told him of Pauling, the Australian, and the robot fight. Yet, when the soldier finished his tale, he realized they had been caught by the mafia and Merasmus had been tortured to death. To Jane's luck, before they killed him, Misha and Mr. Mundy tracked him down and paid off the mafia, which in the conversion of currency turned 12,000 won into $17 US. Because of ghost laws, as Merasmus had died in this Korean factory, he was cursed to haunt it forever. However, the magician asked for just one small favor: for Jane to carry a brick around with him that he could haunt. They could be together forever. After this, to make things even between the soldier and the magician, Jane even travelled to the home of Tom Jones and picked up a brick for the singer to haunt. There, Tom and Merasmus would always be together. After 7 years, Saxton finally gave in to his frustration. He hated Manco and allowed Olivia to leave and ordered Bidwell to keep an eye on her and set up a trust so that she could do anything she wanted in the world. He then gave over control of the company to his other assistant, Reddy. Then he left to find Maggie. 1 week later, the mercenaries of the old Team Fortress planned to meet up at Jeremy's home to celebrate Swissmas and catch up. Spy was the first to arrive, and he was so happy to see how well his son was doing. When he met one of his granddaughters, Tanya, he felt the temptation to reveal who he was, but he could not bring himself to do it. She had broken her tiara and was upset she could not be a princess anymore. To this, he took off his mask and gave it to her. A princess assassin was so much better. Over the following minutes, the rest of the old team arrived. Tavish with his mother and the haunted Islander, Jane, Zana, their children and ghosts, Heavy, his mother and other sisters, as well as the rest of the other mercenaries. As for Miss Pauling, she could not make it and sent a turkey, but where was she? Did she really drop the rest of the Australium into a deep trench, or did she keep it for herself? Regardless, this was the first of many planned Swissmasses. Many years in the future, in the African veldt, Maggie and Saxton fought together against animals in their old age, and they planned to do it until they died. There were no more wars. This was the end of Team Fortress. I had a feeling this would be a bigger timeline, but I did not expect it to be this big. This is one of the weirdest stories I have ever covered, and what I love the most about it is that it used real history and twisted it. I found myself at points thinking, did that really happen? I am not ashamed to admit that I looked up the Great Eagle Scourge of 1822 to see if that really happened. I can confirm it did not. This series has so many interesting things and has spawned even greater things from the community. Rocket jumping, Abraham Lincoln inventing stairs, bread monsters, the sandwich, the mystery of who the pyro was. Were they a man or woman? Why did they see Pyroland, Lieutenant Bytes, Putis, Spycrab, Engineer Gaming? I wanted to add as much to this timeline as I could, but there were just so many random things I could not just slot in. From the Great Eagle Scourge of 1822 to the Gravel War to Man vs. Machine to Classic vs. Current, this was a huge story with a big cast of characters. I actually finished this video a couple of days ago. It was uploading, but then I saw the final release of the comic. This is why the video is so late this year. I hope you enjoyed it. In Valve Presents The Sacrifice and Other Powered Stories and the comic page online, it states that the game that started as a handful of guys in a desert shooting at each other slowly blossomed into the most labyrinthine story in Valve history. It kind of makes sense why it was so odd yet wonderful. The story is all over the place, scattered across time, in videos and on hidden pages. It was so fun to deep dive into all of this and put the puzzle pieces together. Saxton Hale was also asked by Valve to write the foreword for the book in general, so I guess Valve is canon inside of the Team Fortress universe. As a die-hard engineer main, I have always loved the Conagher family line and their connection to Elizabeth/Helen, whatever she was called. I also liked the relationship between Heavy and Medic. Also, apologies for any mispronunciations. I did my best. I have learned my lesson from saying Cryo Chamber instead of Cryo Chamber in the original Portal timeline, and I CTRL-F'd to see the amount of times I used the word where, because I may have used it a little too much in the Portal and Half-Life timeline. Yes, I saw the comments. There are 12 in total in this whole script. There are some to come. Just like many others, Team Fortress 2 was one of those childhood games that moved into my adult years. All-nighters defending the final control point on the final section of Dust Bowl with myself as an engineer and my sister as a pyro sweeping the area for spies. Back then, it was on the orange box version. 2 Xbox 360s side by side. Now, a decade later, we do the same thing just on PC. Even now, Team Fortress is so important to so many people. We also had that leak for a Project White Sands voice acting role, and I find it interesting that White Sands was close to the administrator's base. I am just rambling now. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It was a long one and I do appreciate it. I think that was everything I wanted to say, so please share the video, please like it, subscribe if you are interested in deeper dives into specific topics, which I also cover on the channel. And finally, I would like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Ruben Mendoza, Oren X, Azu, Comfy, Yali Rodriguez, 501st Clone Boy, Drakey Phoenix, Average Soul, Just Batimri, Imperial Embers, Jimsy, Canifex, and Dano Cal Drawings. If you want to help support the channel, then there is a link in the description to become a patron where I do my best to post behind the scenes content, early access to videos, and many other great features. And as always, thank you so much for your continued support. What did you think of this timeline? What is your favorite class? And which game would you like me to cover next in my next timeline? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.